The Southern Pacific 4449 is certainly one of the most famous steam locomotives ever constructed. It's earned every bit of that fame. It combines an unparalleled combination of steam power, beauty, and nostalgia. It was built by the Lima, Ohio Locomotive Works in the 1940s to pull the Southern Pacific's popular daylight passenger trains along the West Coast. It was the newest and most beautiful train the West had ever seen. And it was larger than life. An engine and tender nearly 100 feet long. Loaded with fuel and water, the locomotive alone weighed in at more than 840,000 pounds. The 4449 was in service for 15 years, until the growing popularity of diesel forced her into retirement in the mid-1950s. Given to the city of Portland, she sat until the 1970s, when train lovers had the brilliant idea of making this locomotive the one to pull America's bicentennial freedom train across the country. The man selected to get the retired train back into working order for the bicentennial run back in 1976 was Doyle McCormack, a man who has made railroading both his vocation and his avocation. He supervised the restoration and rebuild, and then rode with the Freedom Train every inch of the way.
And that train was a 26-car train that toured the whole continental United States during the 1975-76 bicentennial celebration that took pieces of American history to the American people. And during its tour, I can't exactly remember the numbers, there were like 3 or 4 million people that went through the train, and there were 15 or 20 million people that saw the train. There were places, Chicago in particular, it was, to talk about it today, people wouldn't believe, but there were so many people down at trackside to see that train go by that it was like a ship parting the ocean. And the slower you went, the longer they stood on the track. I mean, you're just piloting this thing through an ocean of people. There were thousands upon thousands of people. You wouldn't believe it today, but the reaction was that, you know, there's a lot of patriotism in America, and they all came down to see the Freedom Train.
Afterwards, she was returned to Portland and restored to her original red, orange, and black paint scheme. Today, she carries the black and silver colors of the Burlington Northern Santa Fe. Doyle McCormack is in the cab during the occasional excursion. At most other times, a nostalgic McCormack pursues his other love.
What you're looking at here is the remains of probably one of the classiest diesel locomotives ever built. This is an Alco PA, or like I say, the remains thereof. And my intention is to make this look as good as the day it come out of the factory eventually. Put my heart and soul into it, and most of my bank account too. The PAs hold a special place in my heart, if you want to call it that. Like I said, my dad worked for the nickel plate and got me hooked on trains at an early age. In 1955, he made a trip to New York City and took me with him, and we went down to the depot to get on the train, and he took me up and we rode the engine of nickel plate number 8 from Conneaut to Buffalo, which is 116 miles. The engine on that train was a nickel plate PA number 190. That was the first diesel locomotive I ever rode. And from that point on, that became a special engine in my, my passion. And I've always wanted to own, even as a teenager with these wild fantasies, I wanted to own a PA. And it's been a quest I've been on since, I was 14 years old. And it only took me 40 years to do it, is all. If you look at the lines of these and the architecture and the design, they just say speed. The curves, you don't see curves in industrial equipment today. Everything's box, square corners. These have the nice lines, the curves, they're sleek. They got the long wheelbase trucks under them. They just look like something that wants to get out and run at 100 miles an hour. They have a face on them that only a mother could love, I guess, but to a lot of the rail fans, these are the epitome of the diesel locomotive. Well, I can remember, as a boy, my first ride was in a cab just like this. First diesel locomotive ever rode. Sat in the middle seat there most of the ways, and then the engineer, I was only, 12 years old. He brought me over and sat me in his lap. Let me blow the horn, of course. That's pretty exciting for a 12-year-old. And then over the years, I rode on the PAs on the nickel plate dozens of times as I rode back and forth. I was in the Navy at Great Lakes, and my dad would take me on trips. Just formed a real connection with these engines, and when I stand here and I remember those days, I can see them coming back. I'll be 60-some years old when I do it again, but it'll be worth the trip.
There are those of us who love the history of trains. It's people like Doyle McCormack we can thank for keeping that history alive.
Now, year to year, the 4449 has a very irregular running schedule, so it's best to call out to Portland if you're planning a trip to see it. Thanks for being with us, and please join us next time for more Tracks Ahead.